My name is Chris Evans, and I am an assistant clinical professor of journalism here at the University of Illinois College of Media. My job primarily is to teach students how to do practical work that they can get published. I like to try to do that in a short period of time so that they see the results of their work as soon as it is ready to go on the air or into print. This video covers specifically a course from fall 2020, Journalism 200, which is our Introduction to Journalism course. This course section was specifically for journalism majors, which means that we had the course limited to about 17 students, and they were all really engaged, excited to get the work done. Much of what we did in class was learn practical skills, both in terms of what it means to be a journalist and how to practice the art of journalism. We talked about news value and reporting across multimedia platforms. Students interviewed speakers in class, and then they went out into the world to interview others. They practiced shooting videos and photos. They worked together to compile a data story about the university's monitoring of the COVID-19 situation that they actually published in 3 local publications, which allowed everyone to leave the class as a published journalist. Now, although the course met in person, we had a number of guest speakers who joined us on Zoom. We're going to start with a discussion of diversity and inclusion from 2 journalists who I've worked with in the past, and then we're going to hear from a nationally recognized video journalist who covers sports. We have a multimedia community journalist, a political reporter for a large metro daily, a radio journalist with expertise in finding public records, a First Amendment lawyer who helped students understand their legal rights, and finally, we hear from the author of their textbook, who also happens to be the head of the journalism department at the U of I.
The last thing I think before we opened it up to questions that I think we wanted to get into a little bit was just what Isaac had mentioned, is objectivity in journalism. And I don't know kind of what all of your perspectives are, and I'd love to hear them, because I think for a really long time, the narrative around objectivity has been you get both sides and you want to be fair and you want to be impartial. And I think all of those things are true. I think what's hard is when you identify with some sort of characteristic that sets you apart from the majority, people are A, going to look at you and assume, like Isaac's experience, that you have a bias, but B, you might have a personal investment, and it makes it really difficult to then separate yourself from the story. And that doesn't mean that you're not going to report it fairly, but you have to understand that there's naturally just going to be some perspective that you bring. It's about understanding that the sources that you're reporting on, the communities, the issues, it's much more important to get those voices. So, like undocumented immigrants, inmates, people who are directly impacted, you really want to prioritize those voices before anyone else. And a lot of times, I think people assume that you're being biased when you do that, but she sort of argues that that's not necessarily the case. So, yeah, I think that's my summary. I'll link it right here, but that's my take.
Yeah, I thought it was really a fascinating take on it. And I think with objectivity too, part of the struggle obviously is making sure people know that you're capable to report things objectively. But the objectivity piece, if you look at history of journalism, I think one of the unfortunate byproducts of that objective, which is a noble one and is one that we should pursue, I think one of the byproducts is we rely on sources that are official. So because we want things to be provable, as they should be, we rely on police reports, police accounts. Sometimes we rely on court records, or we will go to official sources because, we'll get a statement from the mayor or a statement from a state rep. Unfortunately, often we're talking about communities, but we're not writing for them and we're not asking them questions because of this notion that things have to be objective. And the fear of that has led, well, I think it's changing, I really do. But I think in the past, the unfortunate result of that is that we mostly interview white men in positions of power when we're writing about stories.
I try to interview every single person like they are my best friend. Like even like you guys, I'm going to talk to all of you like we're best friends, because I think that it makes people the most comfortable, and it will elicit the best answers. So, and the interview whenever someone asks me, the interview I always point to and say I'm the most proud of is my interview with DeMar DeRozan, because that was the first time I had ever met DeMar. And to me, it felt like my strongest work in terms of what he was open enough to tell me about. There were so many times in the interview where he would say, you know, I've never said this before. And when someone says that to you, you're like, all right, that's the gold. Keep rolling, you know, that's the exclusive. So yeah, like that, I think making something feel effortless takes effort. Right. I really try to talk to them like they are my best friends. And that takes some time. Having someone feel comfortable is a skill. Being a warm person is a skill. Being inviting is a skill. It's something that you work on for sure. A lot of the interviews that you see, I don't really know the person, but I'm happy that you watched it and felt like I did. But I mean, there are people who have made entire careers off of, you know, being friends with the athlete and having that like come across in the interviews, like Ahmad Rashad. I'm sure if some of you guys watched the Last Dance documentary on Michael Jordan, you would see Ahmad Rashad in a lot of the shots, because that's what Ahmad was. He was best friends with the athletes and did the interviews where he got the best stuff because they felt comfortable. Like, I'm sure, has anybody ever said to you guys, oh, well, you're such a good listener, or it's so easy to talk to you? That is a skill. And you should really try to hone in on that and get really good at making people feel seen and heard and comfortable when they speak to you. Because I really do feel like that'll take you far. And that's not just if you want to be in front of the camera. That's if you want to be a producer. That's if you want to be a writer. That's a skill that helps in all areas where your job is people. I always say, as much as like, obviously I work in the sports business, I really think I work in the people business.
This is my expectation of what I thought being a photojournalist would be one day. I'd be on the sideline of like a cool event. I'd be at the press table filing my photos. And this is from my work day. On the left is one of our seasoned sports reporters. And there I am trying to file photos frantically before I think halftime was over or a break or something was over. But this only happens maybe 2 or 3 times a year that I'm at a press table. Most of the time, filing looks like this. I have become a pro at filing on curbs. You definitely get some strange looks. A lot of people ask you if you're okay, but I am. And these are some of like the coolest events I've covered. I know coolest from a news standpoint. I know on the right, that was when President Trump came to a very, very small town in Maine. And I filed, I think 4 or 5 different times that day. I was just like shooting and then running to this curb because this patch of grass was the only place you could get Wi-Fi or cell service. So that was my place the whole day. And then I know on the left was a protest that I was covering. I have no idea what the curb in the middle was, but that's just a normal day. But they're really cool assignments, but they're like the least glamorous places to file. I've always wanted to be, I love community news. I've always wanted to be at that smaller level where you do get to do the Swiss Army thing. You do get to do a lot of things. And this specializing in one thing hasn't always appealed to me. Once I got the bug at student media, then I was like, well, I want to do it all. I think for me, a huge thing is being at a locally owned, like family owned paper, which I am at. And that is super rare in journalism, especially these days. So I think that as you get bigger, you start getting corporately owned. And so that I'm at like a very nice size where I'm big and I get to do some specializing stuff and things like that. But I'm not so big that, you know, I'm a McClatchy or a Gannett or Gatehouse or like whatever ownership.
Like covering it in like an insular beat, like City Hall or the county government, if your head's too far in that, like you start pitching and doing like these inside baseball kind of stories where only people who are in City Hall care. You know, it's like you got to take a step back and be like, do real people in the world care about this, or just the people that text me about this care about this? So that's a really good question. It's sort of related and not related to burnout. I mean, you can get burned out specifically just writing about those same topics, but also you can get burned out pretty generally. It's been a weird year, and sort of like a lot of the guardrails of like, this is my normal workday, or this is the normal thing I cover, or this is like, you know, my normal schedule are sort of out the window. And in some ways, I think that it's important to be flexible on that, but it's sort of limited, right? So like when the pandemic first started and we shut down restaurants and then went into a lockdown in March, it was like nonstop, like working all the time. But at different points, it was like, okay, now I'm going to take a few days off, and no one's going to tell me to do anything. And sometimes editors are not good about telling you to do that. And sometimes people are like not comfortable being like assertive about, I need to take this. And I always encourage, especially my younger colleagues, like, you need to step in for yourself and take this time.
A lot of the things that were redacted were conversations between university and their lawyers. And that's really hard to get around that particular redaction, because as we all know, you know, lawyer-client conversations are confidential. So I would say I don't spend a lot of my time in those situations fighting redactions, unless like I'm getting like page after page of like blacked out information, and I think that they're taking the redactions too liberally. In this situation, there's enough information contained in there that I don't necessarily need to know the information that's been redacted. Would I like to know it? Like, yeah, definitely. I'm sure there's like some hot, you know, gossip in there, but is it important to the story that I'm trying to confirm? No. I will give you an example though of the Illinois Department of Corrections did a lot of censorship a couple of years ago that I covered, and it was all around issues of race. And I was requesting emails between staff members to basically try and get to the bottom of why this prison removed all of these books that had to do with like civil rights and African-American history and things like that. And then in response, I got like page after page of redacted email, totally redacted. And something that I always include in my FOIAs is if you're going to redact something, you have to tell me why. And they cite a part of the open records law. And the part of the law that they cited was like, it was like opinions expressed in the formulation of a policy aren't subject to FOIA. So basically that people were expressing their opinions, and that was them brainstorming the creation of a policy, and therefore they could redact all of that information. And I never was able to get a hold of those emails, but I was able to, you know, FOIA I was able to get the information I needed through another FOIA. But that is an example of a situation where I think that holds less water than the university redacting conversations it's having with its attorneys, if that makes sense. So sometimes you're like, okay, that's going to be a hard redaction to fight. And then other times you're like, you know, that would actually be easier to do. All of this comes down to like, not only do you have to be a reporter, you also have to think a little bit like an attorney in these situations and try to understand the open records law to the best of your ability.
I will say that a number of the members of the conservative side of the Supreme Court are actually some of the strongest protectors of the First Amendment, and so we actually just had the Media Lawyers in America just had our big national convention about a week ago, and that was actually one of the topics. One of the seminars was it was a moot court competition on trying to repeal New York Times versus Sullivan, because I think that really is seen as kind of the biggest threat, that he would push for that, and that he might somehow have judiciary that would back him up at this time. And that would change. That really would change everything. I mean, that really is kind of what separates, the strong protections that American journalists have from, protections in other countries, where again, if you just make a simple mistake in a story, that opens you up to liability. Well, guess what? Journalists, I mean, we're putting out reams and reams of, pages a day, and there are going to be some small mistakes. And providing that breathing room, I think, has been very, very helpful to a free press in this country. So that's, I think, kind of the biggest concern. I think most of the folks on the call, were of the opinion that's right now, at least. I mean, things can change, but right now we don't see that as being a significant threat. But good Lord, things change quickly.
To me, it's been really great to think about, like, wow, what a different cool kind of experience a journalism student at Illinois can have, because you can get all of the good stuff that journalism programs around the country try to offer, which is a lot of one-on-one kinds of experiences and practical kinds of experiences and opportunities to interact with faculty a lot and work on projects and do stuff, right? You can have all of that in this kind of smaller setting, right? And then also have all of the resources of a giant school at your disposal.